I recently had this vintage Seikosha Ships Clock sent to me for servicing. Owner says the clock runs, but not that good. Structurally, the case looks to be in good shape. The finish at one time looks to have been a gloss black lacquer. The paint has lost its adherence and is in a distressed condition. The exposed base metal, which is aluminum, is swelling and popping the paint off in places. There's a powdery white, dull gray coating common to the aluminum in areas. This is corrosion. It's aluminum oxide. Heavy rust on these fasteners. Aluminum bezel. Hinge looks like it's nickel plated. Bezel fits nice and tight on the top. There's an open crack starting right here. Bezel looks warped badly on the bottom. Fit up is so bad a piece of paper can easily be inserted in the open crack. Fit up of the hinge could be the source. Definitely loose on the bezel. Remove these hands. Two dial washers. The finish on the hands is failing. At first sight, it looks like a crackle paint, but it's corrosion on top of the underlying base metal. It's popping the paint up where the corrosion is. Here in this lowered recess area, there was at one time white paint. It looks like someone has chipped some away in areas. Missing paint areas shows the exposed rust. 3 screws holding the front on. Oh, they're mismatched. I'll mark them where they came from and make sure they get back in the same holes. Front frame lifts off easily. Serial number of A987 stamped on the aluminum on the bottom. To the left are 2 Japanese characters stamped in the aluminum. Not sure if these were legible when the thick black paint covered them. I don't see any other signs of any other numbers or letters on the face of the frame. These are recent scratches left from the regulator arm. The back of the dial has 2 Ks stamped on it. Not sure the meaning of these. Possible they were inspection stamps from when it was new. Multiple greasy fingerprints on the back. Dial is held in with 4 screws. These Japanese characters interpret to indicate luminous dial, to be wound once a day. Unsure of these last ones. Dial is aluminum with painted numbers and minute track. There's several areas of tarnish on the aluminum. The aluminum itself has a delicate matte finish on it. places where the metal key has contacted the dial shows in nicks, dents, and light scratches. Serial number 2951, made by Seikosha, Tokyo, Japan. This black stamp is a Japanese symbol, possibly an inspection stamp. And a second stamp, tough to make out, but definitely another Japanese stamp. White paint here in the center of the hour markers, probably the same as was on the recessed areas of the hands at one time. Up close, the scratches in the aluminum finish start becoming more noticeable. Here's a long, deep scratch. The dial is in need of a deep clean. Risk of removing the two inspection stamps and the painted areas just isn't worth it at this point in time. Door latch, simple but functions well. Here the wood has a crack in it. The gold gilt has a pattern in it. Looks like there are splotches where it is worn through to the brass. Screw heads have heavy rust on them. This black staining is where the rust from the steel screw transferred into the wood. I'll disassemble and inspect the movement. Hour wheel, minute wheel, cannon pinion. This cam is what's used on a striking movement. This green gunk looks like grease. Owner said someone went through this movement a couple of years ago. Tension spring. A lot of wear on the center wheel bushing. It almost looks like grease instead of oil. It's going to need a couple bushings put in to make it right. Almost every pivot is loose. Loosen the hairspring, balance wheel thrust bearing, and hold down for the regulator arm. A small spot of dried oil or dirt. The two screws are mismatched, one flat head and one rounded head. They're actually pocket watch case screws. Pull this front plate off and take a closer look. Pivots are a little dirty. Someone has bent the hairspring sideways. Pallet, escape wheel, fourth wheel, third wheel, center wheel, and the main wheel assembly. The grease is thick and has a brownish rusty color to it. Yet the grease here is dried and green looking. It has stained the gold gilt where it has been sitting. Two different colors of grease on the same part. Now how does that happen? A chunk of broken brass. I'll need to keep an eye out for something broken or chipped. Now here there's green grease and brownish grease on top of each other. Only a butcher would mix two different types of greases together. Looks like someone put one type of grease on top of another. This green grease looks like it was here first. It's hardened almost to a plastic consistency. These two top movement posts have a nice original black finish on them. The bottom two movement posts are covered with rust and corrosion. They look similar to the hands. The threads look good and clean, protected by the fastener on it. Heavy, thick grease on the main wheel gear. Center wheel bushing has thick green grease on it. Should be oil, not grease. Center wheel backplate pivot hole has been greased as well. All the pivots look like someone used grease on them instead of oil. Movement has been pre-cleaned and it's time to take a close look at things. Fourth wheel pivot has heavy rust pits. Pits should be polished out. This pivot is enlarged on the end. This pivot has 6 flat tool marks on it. Someone has mounted the pivot in a 3-jawed chuck twice, leaving flat spots on it. Definitely a sign a butcher has been here. This heavy scoring is going to need to be removed. Now that finished up real nice. This center wheel pivot surface, it has brass embedded on the surface of the steel. This is called galling. Galling is an adhesive wear. It's much different than normal pivot wear seen in clocks. Galling is a type of wear that causes one metal to adhere to another metal that it is in contact with. I believe this galling was caused by a butcher lubricating this pivot with grease instead of oil. Grease is designed to be used on sliding parts, not pivots. I'll need to polish this pivot or it's going to cause excessive wear in a short time period. Just a little bit more polishing to do and it will be ready for service again. Pits on this barrel arbor are rust damage. I have seen this common to movements that have been rinsed with water and not properly dried. The whole surface has this damage on it. Even the pivot is riddled with rust pit damage. If left like this, it'll cut through the brass plate like a buzzsaw. I'll polish all the pits from the actual working surface. The ones on the far end don't contact the working part of the brass plate, so some of those can stay. All polished and much better looking. With all the pivots polished, it's time to bush the movement. A little more reaming and it fits just right. Now to burnish and on to the next. Pivot hole on the front plate for center wheel is fitted with a deep set bushing. I could remove this original bushing and fabricate a new one. However, to retain the originality of the gold gilt in the original one, I'm going to fabricate a custom bushing and bush this hole. Nice. New bushing installed and not even noticeable to the naked eye. Most of these pivot holes have punch marks next to them. Butchery shortcuts. Customer was probably charged for bushings, and all that was done was punch all the egg-shaped holes. On to inspecting the balance wheel assembly. Something isn't running true here. Not sure what it is just yet. If it's a bent pivot, I may be able to straighten it. It won't keep good time running like this. Deep scratches and scoring on the finish of this balance staff. Impulse pin hole is egg-shaped. Several more defective items. Impulse pin is protruding past the balance wheel arm. It should be flush. Here you can see the impulse pin is at an angle to the balance staff. It should be parallel. Deep scratches and rust pits on the balance staff. Mounted in the lathe, looks like the staff is bent near the balance wheel. This can't be straightened, and there aren't any replacements available. The pin is so loose it slides right out. I'll start by bushing the balance staff pivot bushings. I could make new bushings, but then these have a gold gilt finish on them. Owner of this clock wants to keep it as much original as possible, so I'll bush the original gold gilt bushings. I'll use this drill bit for the pivot hole in the new bushing. The balance staff pivot bushing has wear on it. It's egg-shaped. Press the original bushing out. It's going to be a small bushing. Mounted in the lathe, the wear can be seen a lot easier. I've bored the worn hole out, fabricated and installed a plug made from 360 clock brass. It's now time to rivet the plug in place. I use a flat punch on one side and a convex punch on the oil sink side. has good curl over, and it's nice and snug. The convex punch matches the oil sink contour almost exactly. Ready to machine it now. Now to press the rebushed bushing home in the plate. I'll use some paper backing to protect from tool marks. Looks great. Just need to chamfer the edges of the hole. Amazing, this impulse pin just slid out. Should be friction tight. This pin is going to need some attention to operate correctly. Remove the old balance staff. Time to fabricate a new balance staff. It's starting to look like a balance staff now. They fit the pivot holes just great. Hand work the fork clearance slot. The new balance staff pivot rotates nice and true compared to the old bent one. Escape wheel, fourth wheel, third wheel, center wheel, pallet, front plate. Give the train some power. Nice! The balance self-started with just a couple winding turns. Good sign there's low friction on the pivots. Balance has good strong motion. Slight wobble in the balance wheel, but not enough to affect the timekeeping. New balance staff is running nice and true. English lever pallet is working nice and strong with the escape wheel teeth. Fork clearance slot in balance staff is functioning as designed. Hairspring is vibrating between the regulator pins nicely. Impulse pin is working perfect. This setup is spot on. Nice to see a well set up escapement like this working together. A nice original working World War II Seikosha Japanese Imperial Navy ship's clock.